Hello and welcome to Mission Backlog. This is the first review in my second backlog playlist, and we've started with a good one. For those that don't know, my backlog playlist is a random selection of games that I work my way through and do reviews for. Then I randomly select another group of games for the next playlist. It's proving to be a great way to get through the backlog and eliminates that decision paralysis. So why not subscribe if you want to follow the journey, and maybe start your own backlog playlist. Nobody Saves the World is a great little indie game that packs a big punch in the gameplay department. The game was developed by Drinkbox Studios, who I hadn't heard of before seeing them here, so I looked them up. And it turns out they're a fairly small studio, most well known for the Guacamelee series, which I did play when it first came out actually. So solid gameplay mechanics are a strength of theirs, I guess. Oh, and bright colours, and lots of them. I added this game to my backlist after seeing it appear on a few different channels' Games of the Year list for 2022. I'm glad people brought it up, as I think this game would have just passed me by otherwise. With some deep gameplay mechanics, great visuals, and hilarious writing, this game was a fantastic way to start 2023. I played on the Xbox Series X, and the game took me just under 19 hours to beat, so quite a meaty indie game. You begin your journey waking up in a shed, a familiar starting point for many games, though your character, named Nobody, has no memories at all, and for that matter, no pants either. After a bit of exploration, you get your hands on a wand that allows you to transform into various characters, each with their own abilities. There'll be more on this later. The world is filled with various NPCs, and you very quickly realise all is not right in the world, and a dark force called the Calamity is spreading across the land and endangering everything. You team up with a few friends and set out to save the world, adventuring through many regions, exploring dungeons and climbing the ranks of various guilds in an effort to defeat the Calamity and figure out who you are. The story is fairly basic and certainly not very original, though it sets up a decent enough base to build the gameplay on top of. Oh, and the writing is excellent, with a very comedic tone and plenty of clever references to real-world topics, such as Bitcoin. Randy is a particular favourite character of mine, who you form a love-hate relationship with throughout the game. Though the real reason to play this game is the gameplay. So, the main gameplay loop is unlocking new playable forms, which each have their own abilities, both passive and active, and these forms are as far-ranging as a slug, to a robot, to a mermaid, the freaky monster kind, not the Disney kind, and many others in between. I really enjoyed unlocking new forms, and the pace of new unlocks is quick enough to create a very addictive loop. You have to play with each form to level it up and unlock its abilities, forcing gameplay variety and helping you to discover abilities you may never have tried. I know this was the case for me. Enemies will have different resistances and attacks, forcing you to use particular attacks and defensive buffs to defeat them, such as sharp, light, dark, etc. And each dungeon will have different modifiers to force you to change the way you're playing, meaning you can't play the same through the entire game, not even for 30 minutes for that matter. The kicker then comes that you can take any form's abilities, apart from its base one, and put it on any other form, mixing and matching, creating almost endless opportunities for builds. Now, as an example, you could go for a close quarters build using Turtle, like I did, whose own passive is quick recharge for his abilities. Added to this, I had the passive's Strongman from the bodybuilder form, which deals blunt damage when enemies are knocked into walls or each other, Zonom Nom 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 from the zombie form, which gave me 4% of all damage I dealt back as health, and Poison Tipped from the Ranger, which gives all your attacks poison damage. Paired with this, I had Turtle's locked active ability of Hell Shell, which knocks enemies and builds mana. Slow and Steady, also from the Turtle, which gives defensive buffs. Slime Attack from the Slug, it's getting very confusing now, which slows enemies, and Arrow Flurry from the Ranger for sharp attack. Now what the hell does all of this mean? Well, it meant, in a gameplay sense, I could fly into the middle of a huge group of enemies, taking reduced damage due to my defensive buffs, which I could pop constantly due to Turtle's quick ability recharge, while also getting health back from my attacks, so never really in too much danger of dying. All the while dealing extra damage with the synergies created from Strongman and Hellshell. Now if I went into this same situation with the wrong build, I would have died in seconds and found it impossible to get through the dungeon. This was the hook for me. Constantly unlocking new forms with new abilities, leveling up to get their best abilities, and then experimenting with builds until I found those god tier ones that just destroyed everything. Then tweaking these builds, depending on the dungeon modifiers. This was so satisfying, and it felt deserved to wade through enemies by the end, after the time and experimentation invested. As another example, I took Slug, who has a ranged attack as his base, then added Familiars from the Magician, which summons bunnies or tigers to fight for you. Excellent. I then added a passive, which meant the Familiars exploded upon death, giving me a build that enabled me to sit back, firing my ranged attack, while my Valiant bunnies got stuck in. Oh, and then I had a passive that reduced damage from incoming range attacks, so that enemies' own pesky ranged attacks didn't bother me too much. Now I know, I've gone pretty deep into the builds here, but that's what this game is all about. Constant gameplay variety, constant experimentation, and constant fun. Now I have to say, my first few hours with this game were a bit tame, still enjoyable, but nothing compared to later in my journey, since progress is slow in the beginning as you have fewer forms and abilities to play with. So just be aware if you pick this game up that it does get better as it goes on. There's a variety of things you'll be doing during your gameplay, including dungeons, side quests, exploring for collectibles, and building your standing with various factions. You receive star keys for completing quests, and also for completing character-specific missions, such as killing a certain amount of enemies with a certain ability. One thing I would say is that I found it became a bit grindy towards the end. You need a certain number of star keys to open the main story dungeons, and I found to open the last one I had to basically complete everything, almost, and grind a dungeon over and over again to level up my forms to collect the star keys for completing the character specific missions. Now this isn't the end of the world, as I did have fun while doing it, though it would have been nice if this was a bit more optional and the game may be 3 to 4 hours shorter. The enemy design is great, with a large variety to force you to change up your playstyle and excellent visual design, though I did find that new enemies were somewhat lacking in the second half of the game, and they didn't change too much from dungeon to dungeon. And speaking of dungeons, these two became a little repetitive, with little variation from one to the other, even though from the outside you'd think there would be. So it's certainly not a perfect game, though that unlock and gameplay loop is in my opinion one of the best in any game. Added to this the clear respect of the developer for the gamer in small decisions, such as loot on the floor not disappearing, so you don't have to frantically run around trying to collect it all before it does, and there being ample, well-placed fast travel points from the beginning, and also the fact that I easily had enough money during my playthrough to buy all of the items in the shop, which doesn't seem to be the case in most games, and this allowed me to experiment with all of the build options available. Visually, I think this game is stunning, with cartoon-style graphics and colours that really pop off the screen. This obviously does come down to personal taste, but for this style of game, on this budget, I think they've nailed it. The animations are excellent as well, both the enemies and your character, and it's certainly another one of the reasons I looked forward to unlocking new forms to play as, to see how they moved and how all of their attacks worked. The music is banging, and I found myself pumped up entering dungeons when the music would move up to another level. The only thing I would say on this point is that more tracks were needed, as you will be listening to the same ones over and over again, and after 15 or 16 hours, does become a bit tiresome. I played on the Xbox Series X and didn't experience any crashes or major glitches. It ran smoothly throughout, as you'd probably expect, as the game doesn't demand too much. So, what's my rating for the game? Well, I loved my time with this game. It's oozing with personality and has one of the best, most addictive gameplay loops I've seen in a long while. I'm going to give this game a strong 8 out of 10, only being held back by the slight feeling of repetition and grindiness towards the end of the game. And I'd recommend this game to anyone, and I don't think watching gameplay does it justice really. You need to try it for yourself. Now, this was a great way to start this backlog playlist. Next up will be Portal 2, which I've been meaning to play for a very long time, and I hope you can join me for that review as well. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video. Now on to the next one.